hardened his heart to God himself. At last we located Pharaoh Ahmose. Hardened his heart to God himself. At last we located Pharaoh Ahmose.
So 1500, 1580 or 1500 BC, Ahmose.
Here is the man who confronted Moses. Can it be that Ahmose's father remembered the Israelite prince he grew up with, and when he gave his son his Egyptian name, Ahmose, the moon is born, he chose the name because of a play on words. In Hebrew, Ahmose means the brother of Moses. In history, Pharaoh Ahmose is most famous for expelling a foreign nation from Egypt around 1500 BCE. At the time, Egypt was ruled by a people that the ancients called Hyksos. Until recently, little was known about the Hyksos. Then, in the 1960s, their ancient capital, Avaris, was discovered north of Cairo.
Like, you ever seen that movie with Will Smith, where he's a thief, and he has the one big score with that Chinese rich dude at the football game, and he leaves the woman out of the deal, so she doesn't know what's going on. So they go there, and with $1 million, and he tries to. His friend says, "Don't gamble." So when he goes there, he ends up starting to gamble with the guy because the guy is a compulsive gambler. So he sucks the guy in by pretending like that he's just got a gambling problem. And the girls all worried because he's losing all their money. And he eventually loses the whole $1 million. So Will Smith says double or nothing. And it was like an unreal like, pick anybody on the field and I'll guess the number of that person. And just look through your binoculars and pick anyone on the field. And then he goes, that's bullshit. And he goes, well, let me sweeten the deal for you. Pick anyone on the field and she will choose the person. And she has no idea what's going on. So she sold it. So the guy was like, oh man, this is too juicy. I can't not do this. So he goes and he looks on the field and he picks a number. He picks the number 55. So the girl looks down at the field like thinking, I don't want to do this. I'm going to be the one to lose all this money. And he says, don't worry. Just look on the field and pick. So they have a guy who works for them. He's a fat guy, and he was down on the field with a football jersey on because the coach owed them money for gambling. So he let him come on the field with a jersey, and he's fat. And he had the number 55 on. So the girl guessed 55, and the guy goes, how the fuck did you know? Sorry for my language. How did you know it was 55? You won. So they won and everything. Then after they left, she was like, I can't believe you didn't tell me about it. How come you didn't let me in on it? He's like, well, we needed you to sell it. So what we did was, as soon as he woke up, we changed everything in his life, and we put the number 55. So his jealous, the lights that hang, I forget the name though, but they had 55 ingrained in the lights. And all the signs on the way to work had 55. Everybody, they would have people in jerseys all throughout there with the number 55. They had signs, they employed signs with the number 55. They even put his on his suit, the buttons had 55. The guy who was on the field that he chose the jersey from, they put that guy in that guy's way throughout that whole day and made him see that guy several times that day, so that when he looked on the field, he would see 55 in the guy as a familiar, something familiar, and would gravitate to choosing it. So just like the Europeans and all of these people who rule over us and educate us, they keep pushing Arab, Mongoloid, Arab Mongoloid pictures so that you don't identify yourself with those cultures. So with these Hyksos, I'm proposing that they whitewash these Hyksos pictures to make them look more like Arabs with afros. But in actuality, if you look at some of these Google pictures and these articles, they will show you that that a lot of these Hebrew and Israelite and Hyksos slave pictures, the original pictures are more darker, and the afros, they have afros, they're more darker, it looks a little different. So we understand that these people go in and they redraw things and they repaint it and they make it lighter, and they change the outlines of the face to look more narrow, or the noses to look different, because they understand phenotypes. So what I'm trying to say is that Hyksos is actually Hebrews, our people, the Israelites. That's them migrating into Egypt. And that's the story of Joseph, how he becomes king and his family moves into Egypt to Avaris. That's the story of the Hyksos. And I think the Hyksos is the Hebrews, and they whitewash the images, not look less Negro or less Afro.
No one has ever been allowed to film at Avaris. To get there, we needed the cooperation of the Egyptian authorities. They're concerned that in the volatile Middle East, the discovery of biblical artifacts will somehow strengthen modern Israel's claims in the area. As a result, the Exodus is a touchy subject in Egypt today. So we didn't mention Moses, and we stressed that we were interested in Pharaoh Ahmose and the Hyksos he drove out of Egypt. After months of negotiations, we were finally given permits to shoot at Avaris. This is Avaris, a walled city dominated by palaces. 3,500 years ago, it was surrounded by branches of the Nile. Avaris was discovered by Professor Manfred Bitak of the University of Vienna. Although only a few acres are exposed today, in ancient times, Avaris seems to have dominated the area.
Avaris itself was much bigger. It was 250 hectares, so it extended from here to the east about 2 kilometers, and from here to the south perhaps even 1 kilometer.
In the Hyksos period, this was one of the major residences of Egyptian pharaohs.
Egyptian history clearly states that the Hyksos who ruled mighty Avaris were Semites like the Israelites, and that they left on a mass exodus, known as the Hyksos expulsion.
We have in the Bible the story of the Semites leaving Egypt and going eastward from Egypt. At the same time, independent of the Bible, we have a story of the Hyksos being expelled from Egypt. I think definitely the two stories are related. They're describing the same event from different viewpoints.
If the Hyksos expulsion and the biblical Exodus are really one and the same event, then perhaps we can find the long sought-after proof of the biblical Exodus during the Hyksos period. But most scholars say that the Hyksos and the Israelites cannot be equated because the Hyksos left Egypt hundreds of years before Moses was born. These scholars also say that the chronology of ancient Egypt cannot be tampered with.
You can play with Egyptian dates. You can move them up maybe 10 years and down 10 years, but you can't move up and down 50 or 100 years. That's not possible. And yet many people try to do that. They try to adjust chronology to fit their predetermined notion of biblical history. You can't do it.
But maybe we have to. What if scholars are placing the Exodus in the wrong time period? Imagine the confusion if in the future scholars date World War II to the 1990s. They'll never find any evidence that it actually happened. Currently, most scholars date the Exodus to 1270 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II. But some scholars are now breaking with that consensus.
The Bible gives information that would put the Exodus about 480 years before the early years of Solomon, in the middle of the 15th century BC.
That's
Professor Bibb.
That's why in the Bible the battle is called the Battle of Kadesh and not the Battle of Ramses.
Since calculations move the Exodus from its present date to 1470 BCE, less than 100 years from the traditional date for the Hyksos expulsion. These are too close to write off as a coincidence. So we have a new date for the Exodus, approximately 1500 BCE.
The Hyksos and the Hyksos expulsion is what we're talking about when we are talking about the Exodus.
All right, our new date for the Exodus is 1500 BCE. We know from the Bible that the Israelites arrived in Egypt some 200 years before their Exodus. In the original Hebrew, the Bible calls the Israelites God's people, or Amo Israel. If we write about our dates, there should be hard archaeological evidence for the arrival of these Amo around 1700 BCE. Kilometers south of Avaris is the tomb at Beni Hassan. It dates to 1700 BCE. Because no one has looked for evidence of the Exodus in this period, the tomb has never been linked to the biblical story. And yet, there is a perfectly preserved wall painting here that records an ancient migration into Egypt from the area of modern Israel. As in the Bible, the scene involves bearded Semites riding donkeys and bringing their families and flocks into Egypt. Like the biblical Israelites, they are wearing multicolored tunics. The hieroglyphic inscription on this wall calls these people the Amo, God's people. Looking in the right place, during the right time, we are the first to recognize a veritable snapshot of the migration of the biblical Israelites to Egypt. The Bible records that at the time of their arrival, one Israelite rose to the highest levels of Egyptian power. His name was Joseph, son of Yaakov, Jacob in English, and he became so powerful that he wore on his finger the seal of royal authority. Discovering Joseph's seal at Avaris would prove that the Israelites arrived here exactly when our timeline predicts. That would be like finding a needle in a 3,700-year-old archaeological haystack. Incredibly, the tiny seal was found, precisely at the archaeological layer we anticipated. In fact, Professor Manfred Pt2 found no less than 9 seals worn by Joseph's court officials. Inscribed right on them is the Hebrew name Yaakov, Joseph's father.
It's very strange that we found 9 seals with the name Jacob here. It's a biblical name, by the way. The original was probably mounted on a ring worn on the finger, and this gives us a new puzzle.
Is it really a puzzle? Not if one uses our chronology. This is the only time that a Hebrew name appears on an Egyptian royal seal. It directly connects Avaris with the Bible, but Professor Pt2 steers clear of biblical chronology. He's under the constant watch of the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, who have made Avaris off limits to the public. Supposedly for conservation reasons, Professor Pt2 has been forced to cover up his dig every single year. The area is then plowed, seeded, and cultivated by local farmers. No one would suspect that underneath these fields lies an archaeological treasure trove that proves the biblical Exodus. Now that we found hard evidence for the arrival of the Israelites in Egypt and their rise to power, we went searching for archaeological proof of their downfall and the slavery that led to the Exodus. In search of the evidence, we had to travel to a place called Serabit el Khadem, 400 kilometers south of the Nile Delta,